Welcome to all of those of you who have joined us for tonight's event, Zoom lecture on the occasion of Srila Prabhupada's Disappearance Day. We're joined by His Holiness Krishna Kshetra Swami, and without any further ado, I would like to hand over to him. The stage is yours.
The stage, Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu. I'm happy to be with you this evening, ISKCON Berlin, and devotees who are joining outside of Berlin on this special day of Srila Prabhupada's tirobhava. So I'll just chant some pranam, pranati, and then we can begin with some thoughts, some readings to remember, to appreciate, to refresh our memories of this most wonderful Acharya person who came into our lives, who changed our lives, transformed our lives, is transforming our lives. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamahyam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatang Vitam Tang Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitangscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin iti namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I thought we could begin by reading the two final purports that Srila Prabhupada wrote before his departure. As you may know, Srila Prabhupada was translating Srimad Bhagavatam from early 1960s, possibly even late 1950s. He completed the first canto, and it was published in 3 volumes. Prior to his departure for America, when he went to America, he had on board the ship trunks with 2 100 sets of his book or books. And he would take every opportunity while he was traveling to write. Of course, Srila Prabhupada's writing initially was actually writing, and later it was dictating as devotees arranged a recording device for him and so on. But over these years of his traveling and establishing his mission, first in America and then in Canada and then in so many other countries of the world, he always came back to his sort of basic activity, practically without any break. Every night or every early morning, he would sit down and he would proceed with his translation of Srimad Bhagavatam and, of course, then Chaitanya Charitamrita and other books. His final translation and commentary prior, very close to his departure in Vrindavan, was Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 13, Brahma stealing the boys and calves. And we're all familiar with that very special pastime of the Lord. Sometimes it's called Brahma Vimohan Lila because Lord Brahma is very much bewildered by Lord Krishna as he makes this attempt to steal the calves and the cowherd boys. And the chapter ends with Lord Brahma coming to see what has transpired in what for him is an extremely short time, but for Lord Krishna and the residents of Vrindavan has been an entire year. And when he comes back, what does he see? He sees that Krishna is there with all of the cowherd boys and all the calves, just as he had left them. And when Brahma went to check where he had hidden the calves and the cowherd boys, he saw they're also there, and thus he became very confused. And when Krishna then manifested together with all of the cowherd boys' 4-armed forms, then Lord Brahma really became bewildered, but then the light dawned on him and he understood his own foolishness. And then Shukadeva Goswami tells us in verse 63 of this chapter, Uttayotaya Krishnasya Chirasya Padayo Patan Aste Mahitvang Prak Drishtam Smritva Puna, rising and falling again and again at the lotus feet of Lord Krishna for a long time. Lord Brahma remembered over and over the Lord's greatness he had just seen. Srila Prabhupada gives a short purport to this verse. He says, as stated in one prayer, Shrutim apare smritim itare bharatamanye bhajantu bhavabhitaha aham iha nandang vande yasya linde parang brahma. Let others study the Vedas, Smriti, and Mahabharata, fearing material existence. But I shall worship Nanda Maharaj, in whose courtyard is crawling the Supreme Brahman. Nanda Maharaj is so great that the Parabrahman is crawling in his yard, and therefore I shall worship him. And this is from Padyavali of Srila Rupa Goswami. Prabhupada continues, Brahma was falling down in ecstasy because of the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who exactly resembled a human child. Brahma was naturally astonished. Therefore, with a faltering voice, he offered prayers, understanding that here was the Supreme Person. And then there's one more verse to this chapter. Shanaira totaya vimrichalochane mukundam udviksha vinamra kandara kritanjali prasrayavan samahita svavepatur gadgadayai latelaya. Then, rising very gradually and wiping his two eyes, Lord Brahma looked up at Mukunda. Lord Brahma, his head bent low, his mind concentrated, and his body trembling, very humbly began with faltering words to offer praises to Lord Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada writes, Brahma, being very joyful, began to shed tears, and he washed the lotus feet of Krishna with his tears. Repeatedly he fell and rose as he recalled the wonderful activities of the Lord. After repeating obeisances for a long time, Brahma stood up and smeared his hands over his eyes. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments that the word lochane indicates that with his two hands he wiped the two eyes on each of his four faces. Seeing the Lord before him, Brahma began to offer prayers with great humility, respect, and attention. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 10th canto, 13th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Stealing of the Boys and Calves by Brahma. So this is Srila Prabhupada's final purport prior to departing. And it ends with this sentence, seeing the Lord before him, Brahma began to offer prayers with great humility, respect, and attention. So this feeling of Lord Brahma, which is very intense, it's a joyful feeling, he points out, so much so that tears are coming from his eyes, I think is a very significant moment of describing the Lord's pastimes that Srila Prabhupada leaves us with. He leaves us with this, but of course, we want to say that he doesn't really leave us. We want to appreciate how he continues to be with us and continues to inspire us to serve Krishna one of the things that I think we can all appreciate about Srila Prabhupada is that he always called our attention to Krishna, to service of Krishna, not to himself. Maybe 3 days ago, I was interviewed for the third time by one writer in India. I was introduced to him in India this last February or March, February, I think, in Delhi, to speak with him because he's been commissioned to write a book on ISKCON. He's a fairly known author. His name is Amit Kapoor, and I believe he's writing for, his book is going to be published by Penguin. So it's going to be a very widely read book, I'm sure. So he's interviewing several devotees, and he has asked me to answer questions of his 3 times now. And he said this last time, he said, this is becoming so fascinating. I'm becoming more and more fascinated with this whole story. Because one thing I see is that Prabhupada is not like, he's very different from these gurus that we usually see. There are some quite prominent gurus in India today. They're very popular. Sometimes they're called God men because either they or their followers identify them as God himself. We know, of course, Srila Prabhupada was very emphatic that we are a servant of God, all of us. And so he always put Krishna in the front. So anyway, this Amit was saying this is quite remarkable. So it'll be something I think he'll be highlighting in his book. I thought we could look at some remembrance of Srila Prabhupada by, well, first by one gentleman in Vrindavan, the late Shriman Gopal Chandra Ghosh. I had the good fortune to meet and speak with Gopal Chandra Ghosh in 2001. At that time, he was in charge of the Vrindavan Research Institute. Very sweet person. It's mentioned here. I'm taking this from very nice compilation that was done by Mula Prakriti Devi Dasi, our Srila Prabhupada, a friend to all. Early contemporaries remember him. Gopal Chandra Ghosh was, for me, a very striking person, very humble, very sweet personality, and extremely learned about history of the Gaudiya Sampradaya. He has since departed the world, but fortunately these memories have been kept of his remembering Srila Prabhupada in, this would have been the 1950s, and then later he's also recalling when Prabhupada came back in 1971 or 72 with so many Western devotees. And we can begin with a memory he has of Srila Prabhupada remembering his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He says that Srila Prabhupada had been not well. He had been somewhat ill, and he had been keeping himself very, very much wrapped up in blankets and so on. But now he said he is better. He was happy. He was healthy. He was writing again. And he confirmed to Gopal Ghoshji, yes, I am feeling better now. And then Prabhupada told him, at night, my Prabhupada came in my dream. He encouraged me, saying, you do work like Narottam Thakur, like Srinivasa Acharya, and like Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Gopal Ghosh refers to our Srila Prabhupada as Swami Maharaj, as he would also be referred to by Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers, because his sannyas name was Swami, as opposed to Puri or Tirtha or so many other names. He was Swami Maharaj. So some devotees mistakenly think this is somehow a disrespectful way of referring to him, but it's not at all disrespectful. So Swami Maharaj told me joyfully, I have received mercy from my Gurudeva. He blessed me and has given me power. I was too much anxious for the Bhagavata commentary. Now, it's not clear what Prabhupada is saying there. It seems Prabhupada was anxious about whether he was doing it properly or whether he would complete it. In any case, that's all he says. He said, now he's quoting Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur. He says, you just write and all 6 Goswamis will help you. So that's quite a blessing. You just write and all 6 Goswamis will help you. Let's see, there was something more. Oh yes, then in the next paragraph, another vision Prabhupada had. Sometimes he, our Srila Prabhupada, would tell me something special that I, Gopal Ghosh, understood as quite intimate, secret. He said, I saw him one day, I was visiting, and he was chanting Harinam very deeply, and I saw tears coming from his eyes. And then I asked him what was going on. First, he wouldn't say anything, and then he said that he had received a visit the night before. In the courtyard by Srila Rupa Goswami's Samadhi, he saw some very beautiful persons. One was wearing only kopin and was chanting a large tulsi mala around his neck. His eyes were large like lotus flowers, and he was extremely effulgent. Also coming there was another personality, dressed similarly, but older and taller, very kindly to him. Behind them was a much younger sadhu whose beauty and sweetness were captivating. Swami Maharaj told me they were Srila Rupa Goswami, Srila Sanatan Goswami, and guess who? Their nephew, Srila Jiva Goswami. He said they spoke to him and gave him mercy and guidance for his writing and for his future preaching. And Gopal Ghosh says, I tried to ask more, but this was all he would tell me. A couple of more remembrances from Gopal Ghosh Prabhu. He says, I was not in Mathura when he, that is our Srila Prabhupada, took sannyas initiation. He came one evening back to Vrindavan, I guess, wearing red cloth. I said, Maharaj, today you've changed your dress. Yes, he said very gravely, today I have accepted the sannyas order from Srila Keshava Maharaj. And then he tells about what he calls an inauguration ceremony that Srila Prabhupada organized in Vrindavan for his first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam at the Radha Damodar temple. Srila Prabhupada was very energetic. He organized everything himself. He invited and was able to get the governor of Uttar Pradesh to come to this event. Some senior Gaudiya Math persons also came. And he also asked Gopal Ghosh to help. He collected money from some devotees in Delhi to put on the festival. He gave me, Gopal Ghosh, some rupees, told me to preach through Vrindavan streets on a loudspeaker. Prabhupada wanted to tell everyone that the Srimad Bhagavatam in English, first canto, is now available. And this event was to be on Jamashtami Day. So he says, indeed, the Uttar Pradesh governor came, and Srila Prabhupada, our Srila Prabhupada, gave a very nice lecture. All came to hear and see the small children dance. So you can picture this scene. There's a photo here. It shows some of the dignitaries together with Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada took care of the whole thing. And he said, in his speech that day, he explained how much illumination will come from these translations, because many people, both Eastern and Western, will chant Harinam Sankirtan and worship this Harinam with puja and seva. So Srila Prabhupada was confident that this book is going to make a difference. This is, we're looking at, this would be early 1960s. So far, Prabhupada is, he's unknown person, but he is announcing this is all going to happen. My first canto is now published. This is Srila Prabhupada speaking, and other cantos will be published. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita will also be translated gradually, and other books as well. Then Gopal Ghosh says, he told me how he believed this would be a great work because his guru ordered him to preach all over the world. And then Prabhupada says, Gopal Ghosh remembers, I have no courage to do such a task. But now my Gurudev has shown me the light, so I am enlightened by him. And another incident he remembers. Gopal Ghosh says, one time I was walking by Keshigat in the heat of summer, and I saw him, that is our Srila Prabhupada, alone on one of the islands in the middle of the Yamuna. Now, the Yamuna River is kind of constantly shifting, and sometimes it would create small islands of sand. These are kind of coming and going. It says he saw Srila Prabhupada on one of these islands across from Keshigat. He had prepared the sand like a small hill, and he had put his danda, his sannyas danda, in the middle of this little mound of sand. And then he was circumambulating that little hill, chanting Hare Krishna and Hari Bol, joyful like a child. Gopal Ghosh says, I could see that he was absorbed in spiritual ecstasy. Another time I also saw him performing Sankirtan, chanting and dancing near that same place along with 3 or 4 persons. When I called greetings to him, he said, this is Prabhupada replying to Gopal Ghosh, we are wandering in great happiness on the bank of the Yamuna. And maybe one more little incident, or maybe 2, from Prabhupada in Vrindavan. Gopal Ghosh says, there was an old lady who daily came from the Yamuna after taking bath. She was very old, and she had this old walking stick. It was very beaten and broken. And once Srila Prabhupada said to her, "Oh, Guru Ma, you please take my stick and give me your stick." Prabhupada wanted to trade sticks. Prabhupada had a very nice cane, a nice walking stick. So he said, you take this one, I will take yours. I want your blessings, Prabhupada said to this woman. The old lady began to weep. She began to cry. Oh, Baba, you are joking with me. I am not able to take your cane. It will be stolen. Someone will snatch it from me. You please keep it yourself. And Prabhupada, okay, he didn't insist, but he gave her some rupees. He remembers. Prabhupada gave her some rupees. And speaking of giving such respect to this little old lady, there's reference to another lady who was his god sister. There was a Bengali devotee, Kiran Bhala Devi, who lived in Vrindavan. She had been in Bagh Bazar in Calcutta, before that Mayapur, and she had sold whatever she had. Typically, ladies in India, you'll see they'll have ornaments, and especially in the villages, silver, maybe gold ornaments. That's the wealth of the family, is worn on the body of the woman. She sold all of that. And she had been a widow for 16 years in Vrindavan, and she lived in a small hut in what he calls the Gopinath district. And she would beg on the steps of the Govindaji temple. So Gopal Ghosh says, I noticed Srila Prabhupada would always give her some Lakshmi, fruits, and grains. And he would gently ask her, you are quite well? Your bhajan is good? And she would say, brother, you please bless me so I shall leave my body in Vrindavan. And then he reports that in May of 1978, we admitted her in the Ramakrishna Hospital, and she expired always chanting Harinam and not depending on any rich person. So that means she left successfully in Vrindavan, because Ramakrishna Mission Hospital is in Vrindavan. Well, on and on, a whole book full of memories of Prabhupada before he went west. But now I would like to share some memories of Shyamasundar Prabhu. Some of you may have already read. This is Chasing Rhinos with the Swami in Volume 2. And I met Shyamasundar Prabhu in Mumbai in March. He signed my copy of the book. And he told me things which you can also read in the book, but it was very sweet just hearing him speak about his memories of being with Srila Prabhupada so much. Something that Shyamasundar emphasizes throughout his books. There are 2 volumes. There's a 3rd volume coming. He said it's actually already done, ready to be printed. Is what a spirit of adventure it was to be with Prabhupada. It was always an adventure. Each day was a new adventure, a new surprise, something unexpected and something exciting. It was always fun. He said it was always fun to be with Srila Prabhupada. It was, and he says also in the book how much Prabhupada would make him laugh. He had a particular relationship with Prabhupada of, a certain, I guess, hasya rasa. And he says sometimes Prabhupada would say something and then he would look over, sort of a side glance to Shyamasundar, like making an inside joke. So that relationship was there. But I thought it's nice to remember the adventures of Srila Prabhupada and Shyamasundar and one other devotee whose name I'm forgetting, not Aruna, another devotee in Moscow, particularly because I think it connects to, in a sort of indirect way, but it connects to Berlin, because of course Berlin has been a divided city with the famous or infamous Berlin Wall. And of course, I remember the time when the wall was very much a reality, and we would make visits on the other side of the wall, going through Checkpoint Charlie. So all of that, you can say the change that comes, the political change, massively significant, globally significant change that happens in 1989. We can say it began in 1971. And Shyamasundar says as much. He says, Prabhupada arrived in Russia in on June 20th, 1971. And the short time he spent there could rightly be called 5 days that changed the world. So Shyamasundar tells the whole adventure of meeting Professor Kotovsky, eventually meeting this young man, Anatol, who will become Ananda Shanti. So I'll jump to his meeting with Professor Kotovsky. Professor Kotovsky was, you could say, a very well-conditioned communist, apparently. He was following the communist doctrine, the Marxist doctrine that he had been trained in, probably from childhood. So arrangement had been made. I don't remember the details, how it came, the initial contact, but in any case, it was arranged that Prabhupada would meet this Professor Kotovsky. And Prabhupada is, as he would always be, extremely direct in his presentation, in a way which one might almost feel was naive, was too much innocent. So Prabhupada said, and this is Shyamasundar quoting him, Prabhupada said to Professor Kotovsky, so we have come so far to see you to discuss that modern sociology is targeting the state or the people as the owner of a certain state. But our Vedic conception is Ishavasyamidam sarvam, everything is owned by Isha, the supreme controller. Of course, Marxism is thoroughly atheist. And Prabhupada doesn't care. He says, we understand that everything's owned by Isha, the Supreme Controller. And Shyamasundar says, I quietly turned on the Hitachi cassette recorder in my book bag, and like any good spy, I slide it unseen beneath the table. And then Prabhupada goes on, he says, the other day, I was reading in the paper, the newspaper, Moscow News. There was a Congress, Communist Congress, and the president declared that, quote, we are ready to get others' experience to improve. So Srila Prabhupada takes this as an invitation. So here I am. I'm ready to help. He said, so I think the Vedic conception of socialism or communism will much improve the idea of communism, just like we are thinking in terms of human beings, the socialist state, that nobody should starve, everyone must have his food. And then he goes on to tell about the what he calls the Vedic conception of the grihasta, that the grihasta, the householder, should see that even a lizard or a snake living in the house should not starve. So here is this professor, like Prabhupada would say sometimes, big professor. Here's this professor, concerned about communism, socialisms, the Union of Soviet Social Republics, and so on. And here's Prabhupada talking about feeding lizards and snakes. They should not starve. And what to speak of others? The grihasta, before taking his lunch, he is recommended to stand on the road and declare that, quote, if anybody is still hungry, please come. Food is ready. Then, if there is no response, then the proprietor takes his lunch. He says, in this way, there's so many good ideas about socialism for communism. So I want to share them with you. And Kartovsky is, he's kind of standoffish person. He says, yes, here we are very interested in this kind of history of old God, he says. And then Prabhupada just kind of ignores that comment and goes on to speak about Varnashram. And Kartovsky says, but all this has changed now. And Prabhupada says, again, just straightforward, yes, but we want to revive the best from the original idea. And he goes on to talk about Varnashram. But then Kartovsky says, so forget about Vedas. Our approach is we don't believe in anything without argument. Okay, Prabhupada says, argument is allowed, but not with a challenging spirit. And then he says, just like cow dung, you are familiar, you are thinking it is dirty, but Veda says it is pure. And science also says it is disinfectant. So why don't you accept? You are pursuing Lenin consciousness. We are trying to understand Krishna consciousness. Both are historical personalities. Both are telling us to surrender. Our life is by surrender, is it not? So like this, Prabhupada was being quite straightforward in his presentation. And of course, the great result from Prabhupada's visit to Moscow that time was the sort of chance meeting with this young man, Anutol, whom Shyamasundar had met on the street when Shyamasundar was shopping. And they got into conversation. Shyamasundar brought him back to the hotel room together with one other boy. The other boy was not so interested. He left after some time. Anutol stayed. And as we say, the rest is history. And then there's a funny sort of, how to say, sequel to this. What is her name now? Just slipping my mind. Eventually, Srila Prabhupada arranges for him to be married by, what's her name? This French devotee who had resolved not to marry. And the last place she would want to go would be to Russia. And Prabhupada asked her, how would you like to go to Moscow and marry this boy? And she said, yes, okay. Such power Prabhupada had. Yes. Well, this was so many years ago, and here we are in the year 2020. And on the day of the departure, the tirobhava of the Acharya, it's good, I believe, to look back on his legacy and to look forward, to be thinking, how do we carry that legacy forward? What is it that we can do to carry what the gift that we have received, and to carry it to others? I just read, one devotee called attention to a nice comment that His Holiness Sachinandan Swami made 1 or 2 days ago. Srila Prabhupada, he said, is like the North Star, Dhruva. The stars are all moving. You cannot orient yourself to them if you're in the middle of the ocean. But there is one star that you can orient yourself to, and that is the North Star, because it is fixed. All the other stars are rotating around it. And of course, Dhruva refers to the person, Dhruva Maharaj, whose planet this is, but also the word Dhruva means fixed. So Srila Prabhupada is this fixed star, and yet this fixed star who is Srila Prabhupada, what is he doing? He is pointing us to Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is, we can say in one sense, anything but fixed. He is restless. He is always, he's always moving. He's always doing unexpected things. And that Lord is our Lord, whom we are taking shelter of. And that is the great challenge that Srila Prabhupada has given us, to take shelter of and to give shelter. And so we can also be reminded, as we do every time we chant Srila Prabhupada's pranam mantras, the second one, Namaste Saraswati Devi, Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine. Srila Prabhupada himself composed this mantra to describe his mission of Nirvishesha Shunyavada Paschatya Desha Tarin. He is delivering, literally it's saying Tarine, unto the one who delivers. A Tarin is one who crosses. Tarine, unto the one who crosses, or brings across. Paschatya Desha, to Western lands, but of course his Western lands ended up including also Eastern lands, including former Soviet Union, including China. Although Prabhupada didn't personally go to China, he went to Hong Kong, which is a kind of gateway into China. But Nirvishesha Shunyavada Paschatya Desha, delivering from Nirvishesha and Shunyavada. The depth to which the world is absorbed in what Prabhupada called impersonalism, Nirvishesha, and Shunyavada, voidism, is hard to comprehend. The devotees in New York were wondering, why is it that Srila Prabhupada is always talking about these nirvishesh, these mayavadis? They thought he seems to be holding some grudge about some obscure philosophers in India. Until they realized that no, Srila Prabhupada was speaking about themselves. And so this is also for us to be aware of as we look at ourselves, that we are, we want to make sure that we are not ourselves overcome by nirvishesha shunyavada, that we can ourselves understand the personality of Godhead, and with the personality of Godhead, the personality of the personhood of all there is, of all of Krishna's creation. That way we can understand Prabhupada's message and be able to communicate it effectively to everyone, so that everyone can join in the festival which Srila Prabhupada was celebrating in Vrindavan on a sand island in the middle of the Yamuna, dancing around his danda. We can perhaps end with that image of Srila Prabhupada dancing and chanting, dancing around his danda in the middle of the island, in the middle of the Yamuna, and chanting Hare Krishna in anticipation that we would be joining him, and that more and more, and eventually the whole world would be joining in this endless festival of Krishna Bhakti. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Yes, Mandakini. I see now the reference here from Dhirali. Mandakini, it was who Srila Prabhupada arranged to marry Ananda Shanti Prabhu.
Thank you very much,
So,
Maharaj,
Hare
for
Krishna.
this wonderful presentation. I see there are 65 participants. I don't know if anyone has a question or a remark or anything, but if usually I tell people to unmute themselves and speak, but with 64 people, it might become a bit chaotic. So, but I don't have an alternative solution. So maybe if anyone has a question, we still might have some minutes. Yeah, just unmute yourselves or type it into the chat box. Munindragana Prabhu has a question, and I can see somebody.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj.
You have to go closer to the microphone, I think.
If you can come close to the microphone.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, my obeisance is to your lotus feet. Thank you very much for your nice lecture. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Guru Maharaj, I would like to ask you humbly, because you were sharing so many nice remembrance from Srila Prabhupada, I would like to ask you humbly, maybe you can share with us your personal favorite story or remembering with Srila Prabhupada.
You mean my own memories?
Yes, or your favorite story, or what your main remembering, what you like the most, the favorite story.
Okay. I don't know about favorite memories. Okay, one favorite memory, if you like, is, again, this is a nice image, I think, that we can all put in our minds, which I've always liked to remember from personally seeing, was when Srila Prabhupada was in London in 1973 in the summer. And there was Ratha Yatra, as they do presently, going down from Marble Arch to Trafalgar Square, with 3 carts, one each for Jagannath, for Baladev, Subhadra, and Jagannath. And with Srila Prabhupada, who became so joyful at the event, instead of sitting on Subhadra's cart, he joined on the street, walking along in front of Subhadra, and with his hands raised and with tears in his eyes, dancing all the way. Very joyful, very amazing to see. And, with a smile, and just like, this was, the perfection of life. To be with all the devotees and with Lord Jagannath. It was like a victory procession. And no words were needed. Of course, Srila Prabhupada did give a lecture when we all arrived at Trafalgar Square. Then they had a big setup for him to sit on a nice vyasasana and speak to the crowd. And that was all very nice, but the thing that really struck me was that he was dancing in Rath Yatra. And for us, we were seeing Prabhupada dancing, and I had the feeling, thinking about it later, that Prabhupada must be seeing Lord Chaitanya dancing. And, despite our blindness, in effect, we were allowed to see through Srila Prabhupada, Lord Chaitanya. Yeah. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Yes, I think, is it Eva wants to ask something? Oh, I thought you were raising hand. Okay.
So if
Okay.
anyone has a question, they still have the chance to unmute themselves now and say something briefly.
You
Otherwise,
have a chance. Hare Krishna.
otherwise we'd be concluding the evening.
It's nice, you know, as far as memories go, as I'm sure most of you know, there are so many interviews, recordings of devotees, their memories of Srila Prabhupada. And you can find them on YouTube now. So there have been, I heard recently there are now some 53 books different devotees have written about Srila Prabhupada. So, of course, Prabhupada wants us to read his books. And that's as it should be. But we also like to read about him. There's something about Srila Prabhupada's ways that is just so attractive. And I think one thing that's so amazing about Prabhupada is how he touched the hearts of so many people, despite our being so different. And so each of our experiences of Srila Prabhupada will be so different, and yet in this one person, Srila Prabhupada, he was touching so many people.
There is one more question I see. They would just have to unmute themselves because they are currently, yeah.
Krishna Kshetra Maharaj, thank you for a nice lecture. And you talked about keeping on the legacy of Srila Prabhupada. I just wanted to ask how new devotees can keep on the legacy of them.
How can, sorry, I missed, I think one or two words.
How can new devotees keep on the legacy of Srila Prabhupada?
Oh, how can new devotees keep the legacy? Yeah, first thing is read about and hear about, and also hear directly lectures of Srila Prabhupada. There's so many recordings, his lectures, his conversations, to imbibe his spirit, I think is so, it's so valuable just to listen to him. The sound of his voice, the sense of urgency, the utter conviction. I mean, the depth of Srila Prabhupada's conviction, you know, we can sort of absorb that, whether we are new devotees or not so new devotees or old dinosaur devotees like me, we can always benefit. We can always benefit from hearing, but also reading about and getting a sense of how much Prabhupada wanted to establish a functioning mission that would carry on. And also to imbibe a sense of, well, a sense of courage. Srila Prabhupada was encouraging. We heard a few days ago from my godbrother Kripa Moy Prabhu, the word encouraging means giving courage. Srila Prabhupada was always giving courage, and one thing he would do again and again was to send devotees to different places to start preaching centers, to start temples. These were, I mean, everyone was a very young devotee when Srila Prabhupada was present. At most someone would be with him for the time he had been preaching, but basically everyone was very young. But Prabhupada would give so much responsibility and say, just take my teaching and go and preach. And then they would do it. And every town and village, this was the spirit. Just, whatever you think you have to do where you are, his mood was, well, just drop it and go. And this was going on in India when they were traveling. Prabhupada and a few devotees, sometimes they would be going by train from one city to another. And along the way, Prabhupada would tell one devotee, you get out here and just stay here and preach. What? Yes, we can hardly imagine that now, but that was the mood. Just go and preach. So take courage. And at the same time, be very thoughtful and listen to senior devotees. Try to understand. It's an ongoing process of deepening our sense of what is Krishna consciousness and how do we ourselves practice and how do we share it. This is ongoing process. Not that one day we say, okay, now I got it. Now I know what it's all about. As soon as we think, now I know what it's all about, Krishna disappears. But we can also take courage and inspiration from Srila Prabhupada's sense of confidence that, yes, because of the nature of Krishna consciousness, we can be successful in preaching it. I always like to tell this story that that Guru Das tells in his book, title which I don't remember, that they were in Vrindavan. Prabhupada was in Vrindavan. Guru Das was the president of Vrindavan Krishna Balaram temple for some time. And Prabhupada was having the different senior devotees give the evening Bhagavad Gita class. And Prabhupada would sit in the courtyard and listen to his disciples giving the class. So try to imagine you're giving Bhagavad Gita class and Srila Prabhupada is listening to you. So the devotees were preparing as best they could. They were memorizing shlokas and quoting them in the class. And then it was Guru Das's turn. And Guru Das said, I can't learn a sloka to save my life. But he did his duty. He gave a class. According to Guru Das, it was a very simple class. But afterward, he went to Srila Prabhupada and Prabhupada said, very nice. Now I can retire. And Gurudas said, well, how, what are you saying? And Prabhupada said, and Pishima liked your class also. Pishima is Prabhupada's sister. Pishima did not understand English. And Gurudas said, but Pishima doesn't understand English. And Prabhupada said, no, she could understand, and she said it was very good. And so now I can retire. And Prabhupada said 3 times to him, after he gave this very simple class, he said, now I can retire. Meaning, he felt that his devotees were becoming qualified to carry the legacy. So that's what we have to do. That's our task. Okay, it's getting a little late.
Yeah, it's getting a little late. There is one question in the chat, but I think you have like just answered with what you just said. You kind of answered that questions. Was about, can you please tell us how Srila Prabhupada dealt with devotees with different natures? Like if someone was more scholarly versus someone more inclined to do menial services, etc. And would he make efforts to identify those natures? So I think you kind of just answered that, but maybe if you still have some more comments on that, you could very briefly say a few words.
Well, Prabhupada seemed to understand everyone's nature immediately, and even without speaking with the person. And his engaging of people, his engaging of devotees was, always with a sense of the person's qualification. The questioner mentioned if someone was scholarly. Prabhupada had some scholarly devotees, and Prabhupada appreciated and did what he could to encourage them. So, for example, Swarup Damodar Prabhu, who became Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj, became one of the first people of Bhaktivedanta Institute. And Srila Prabhupada would always encourage him with that, and he would always refer to him. We have Dr. So-and-so has doctorate in chemistry and so on. And Ravindra Swarup Prabhu, he encouraged also, and some others. And if it didn't matter, I mean, this was not, for Prabhupada, this didn't mean that this devotee was more qualified spiritually. It just meant everybody can do a service, whatever it is. And Prabhupada caught that one time when some devotees were kind of saying, well, the real service is distributing Prabhupada's books, because that's what he said. Prabhupada said, no, every service matters. Every service is service to Krishna. So let us all remember the legacy Srila Prabhupada's given us. Big responsibility we have. And yes, let's expand Berlin Yatra.
Thank you very much, Maharaj, for these wonderful concluding words and for your nice presentation. And thanks to all of those devotees, those dozens of devotees who've joined us from not only Germany, but also from many other countries, and many whom I have not seen before at any of our Zoom lectures. Thank you for being here for the first time, or for being a recurring or returning participant in our Zoom lecture. And Maharaj, we hope that we can hear from you very soon again. It's always nice to have you. Thank you very much and have a good night. Hare Krishna.
Gute Nacht alle. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Ananta Goti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Premanande Hari Bol.
Hariol. Jai Maharaj.